I turned 46 on a Thursday, the kind of birthday you don't celebrate loudly anymore. No candles, no wishes, just a quiet reminder that you've given most of your adult life to one place and it has started to take you for granted. My raise meeting was scheduled for the same week. HR called it annual alignment. My manager called it good news. I walked into the conference room already tired, coffee in my hand, notebook under my arm, tie loosened because I'd been there since 7. She was sitting at the head of the table, legs crossed, tablet in front of her. 2 people from HR on the side, neutral expressions already halfway checked out. The glass wall reflected my own face back at me. I looked older than I felt. She smiled before I even sat down. "We finalized your adjustment," she said, tapping the screen. 13%. There it was. 13. On paper, that's not nothing. In emails, it looks generous. But context matters. Inflation had eaten half of it. My role had quietly expanded into 2. I'd trained 3 people who now outranked me. I'd closed deals that paid for entire departments. I nodded, waiting for the rest. She tilted her head, amused. "Look at you," she said, "at 46, still climbing. Slowly, but still." One of the HR reps smiled reflexively. Someone gave a small laugh. The kind people make when they're not sure if they're allowed to. She continued, casual now. "I mean, when you started here, expectations were different. You're doing well for where you are." Where you are. I felt the heat in my face before I felt the anger. Not explosive, just a dull pressure, like something heavy settling in my chest. I didn't argue. I didn't bring up benchmarks or market rates. I didn't mention the late nights, the weekends. The fact that half the processes keeping our division alive had my fingerprints on them. I folded the printed summary once, cleanly, looked at her and said, "Thank you for letting me know." The meeting ended 5 minutes later. Back at my desk, I sat still longer than necessary. The office hummed around me, Slack pings, phones ringing, keyboards clicking. Normal life. My screen glowed with unfinished work that suddenly felt very far away. Around noon, one of my coworkers leaned over the partition. "Hey," he said quietly. "That was rough." I shrugged. "It's fine." He hesitated, then added, "She didn't have to say it like that." No, she didn't. And the fact that she did told me more than the number ever could. That night, at home, I opened my laptop after dinner. Not to work, to think. 16 years. Same company. Same promises. Recycled with better fonts. I'd always believed loyalty was currency, that if you stayed steady, the system would correct itself. But that smile in the conference room hadn't been careless. It had been comfortable. So I did something new. I created a folder. Nothing dramatic. Just a plain name. Inside it, I started saving things I'd never bothered to keep before. Emails confirming decisions. Timelines of projects that somehow changed ownership. Meeting notes where my suggestions became someone else's strategy. I wasn't plotting, not yet. I was just paying attention. Over the next few weeks, I noticed patterns I'd ignored for years. Credit drifting upward. Responsibility drifting downward. My name missing from decks I'd written. At work, she stayed the same. Friendly. Confident. Occasionally patronizing in ways that left just enough deniability to make you doubt yourself. "You're such a team player," she said once, smiling. "That's rare at your stage." At your stage? I stopped correcting her. By the 3rd month, something else changed. Recruiters started calling, not constantly, just enough to notice. Roles that looked suspiciously like mine. Same scope. Better titles. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to move. I still believed, stupidly, that effort would speak louder than ego. Then one afternoon, an unfamiliar number rang my phone. I let it go to voicemail. The message was brief, calm, professional. "This is Daniel from North Star Solutions. We're a competitor of your firm. We've been following your work for some time. When you're ready, we'd like to talk." I listened to it twice. Then I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling, realizing something important. They hadn't found me by accident, and whatever jokes she thought she was making back in that conference room, it wasn't funny anymore. I didn't call North Star back right away. That surprised me more than anything. 6 months earlier, a message like that would have sent my heart racing. I would have stepped outside, lowered my voice, asked careful questions. Instead, I saved the voicemail and went back to my desk like nothing had happened. Because once you've been laughed at, politely, professionally, you stop mistaking attention for validation. Work didn't slow down after my raise, it accelerated. My calendar filled up faster than before. Projects I used to lead were now labeled cross-functional, which mostly meant I did the work while someone else presented it. My manager started delegating through me instead of to me. Can you walk them through this? Can you clean this up before it goes upstairs? You're so good at translating chaos. That word again, good. Not senior, not strategic, just useful. One Friday afternoon, she stopped by my desk, not to talk about work, to talk about optics. We're reshuffling some responsibilities, she said, lowering her voice like she was doing me a favor. Nothing to worry about. I just don't want you to feel overlooked. I looked up at her, calm, curious. Overlooked how? She smiled, that practiced one. You know, at this stage in your career, it's about stability, not ambition. You've earned that. There it was again, the quiet ceiling. The implication that wanting more at 46 was embarrassing. I nodded. I appreciate the transparency. She seemed relieved. People like her always did when you didn't push back. Resistance complicates narratives. That weekend I opened my laptop again. Same folder, more files. I mapped timelines. Not emotionally, logically. Who approved what? When titles changed, when reporting lines shifted. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic. Just patterns that only made sense when you stepped back far enough. I realized something uncomfortable. My loyalty hadn't been exploited accidentally. It had been priced in. Monday morning, I took a call from a recruiter I recognized. Not North Star. Another firm. He didn't dance around it. They see you as a stabilizer, he said. The kind of person who fixes things quietly. I asked him what that usually meant for compensation. There was a pause. Less than market, but reliable. After I hung up, I sat there staring at my inbox, feeling something solidify. Not anger, clarity. At work, the tone shifted subtly. I was invited to fewer high-level meetings, still looped in afterward, of course, to execute. During one review, she praised my attitude. You don't have that entitlement problem, she said. Some people your age get difficult. I smiled. I thanked her. Inside, something detached. That night, I finally returned Daniel's call. We spoke for 20 minutes, about systems, about scale, about what happens when companies confuse silence with consent. He didn't flatter me. He didn't promise anything. He just asked specific questions that told me he knew exactly what my role had been. Before hanging up, he said, "We'll be in touch. There's timing involved." Timing. That word stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, I watched my manager make small mistakes, not catastrophic ones. The kind that happen when someone's confident no one's checking. She spoke in meetings about my team's approach, referencing decisions she'd never been part of. She signed off on changes without fully understanding the downstream impact, and each time I fixed it quietly, because that's what I'd always done. Until one afternoon, she called me into our office. "We're streamlining leadership layers," she said, folding her hands. "It's nothing personal, just efficiency." I waited. "You'll still be essential," she added quickly. "Just not central." Essential, but not central. I walked back to my desk, heart steady, mind clear. That night, I didn't open my folder, I opened my calendar. And I realized that for the first time in years, my future wasn't tied to convincing anyone of my worth. They thought they were shrinking my role. They had no idea I was already stepping out of the frame. The strange thing about being quietly sidelined is that it gives you space. No one watches you closely when they think you're finished competing. You become background, reliable, predictable. And that's when you start seeing the whole board instead of just your square on it. After the streamlining meeting, my workload didn't decrease. It just lost its visibility. I was copied after decisions, not before. Asked to sense check things that were already in motion. At first, I corrected issues the same way I always had. Privately, carefully. But over time, I noticed the consequences of my silence traveling further than I expected. A vendor escalation that should have been caught early wasn't. A delivery date slipped. Not disastrously, just enough to raise eyebrows. I flagged it once, in writing, briefly. No emotion, no response. So I stopped shielding them. Not sabotaging, just not intervening early. I did my job. I followed scope. I answered what I was asked. Nothing more. Within weeks, friction appeared. During one leadership call, someone asked why a system behaved a certain way. My manager answered confidently and incorrectly. I stayed quiet, not out of spite, out of accuracy. She hadn't asked me, she hadn't looped me in, and correcting her publicly would have helped her more than it would have helped the truth. After the call, she stopped by my desk, irritation thinly disguised as curiosity. "You could have jumped in," she said. "I wasn't consulted on that change," I replied. Calm, factual. She stared at me for a moment, then smiled tightly. "Right. Next time." There was no next time. The next few months felt like a slow unmasking. Her decisions began to stack without the safety net she assumed existed. Processes drifted, documentation lagged, small inefficiencies multiplied. Nothing exploded. But the hum of the office changed. Meanwhile, Daniel called again. This time, it wasn't exploratory. "We're restructuring," he said. "Your name came up repeatedly. From different people." Different people. Not him. Not HR. Engineers. Partners. People who'd worked across from me in silence for years. He asked if I was open to a conversation. I said yes. The interview process was methodical. No theatrics. They asked me to explain failures I'd prevented, systems I'd stabilized, moments where I'd chosen the unglamorous fix over the visible one. At the end, Daniel leaned back and said, "You realize you've been underscoped for a long time." I didn't argue. Back at my company, the pressure rose. A quarterly review revealed delays that couldn't be massaged away. My manager presented slides that were thinner than usual. When questions came, she deflected. When that failed, she referenced decisions she claimed were collaborative. Someone asked my name. The room went quiet for a second too long. She jumped in quickly. He was involved operationally. Operationally. Later that day, she sent me a message. Short, sharp. "We need to talk." In her office, the tone was different. Less confident. Less amused. "I feel like you've disengaged," she said. "That's concerning." I looked at her, truly looked, and realized she wasn't angry. She was nervous. "I've been doing exactly what's been asked of me," I said. "That's not the point," she snapped, then caught herself. "You're a senior person. People expect leadership." I nodded. Then maybe my role should reflect that. Silence. She leaned back, folded her arms. "Let's not make this about titles." But it already was. That evening I received an email from North Star. An offer. Clear scope. Clear authority. Compensation that made my 13% look like an apology. I didn't sign it right away. I sat there, laptop open, thinking about 16 years. About loyalty. About the quiet ways people teach you your value without ever saying it out loud. The next morning, my manager called an emergency meeting. Finance was present, HR too. There were questions about a delayed rollout, about missing approvals, about why decisions had been made without proper review. For the first time, she didn't have clean answers, and for the first time, people were looking at me, not for rescue, but for explanation. I realized then that this wasn't just about leaving. It was about what happens when the person holding everything together stops pretending that's their job. That night, I signed the offer. And for the first time since that birthday meeting, I slept without replaying conversations in my head. I didn't announce my resignation right away, not because I was afraid, but because timing matters when systems are already under strain. Leaving too early would have turned me into the convenient explanation. Leaving at the right moment would force them to confront what had actually been holding. The week after I signed the offer, the office felt brittle. Meetings multiplied, calendars filled with quick syncs that were anything but quick. Finance started asking for reconciliations that should have already existed. Compliance requested documentation no one could immediately produce. None of it was catastrophic on its own. Together, it was noise, the kind that only happens when coordination starts to fail. My manager tried to regain control by tightening her grip. More messages, more urgency, less clarity. "I need you on this," she said one morning, standing by my desk. "We can't afford another delay." I looked at the request. It wasn't in my scope anymore, officially at least. "I'll support where I can," I said, but I wasn't part of the decision chain on this one. Her jaw tightened. "You know how this works." I did. That was the problem. Later that day, a director pulled me aside near the elevators. "Off the record," he said, lowering his voice. "Are you still aligned here?" I answered honestly. "I'm doing what's expected of me." He studied my face, then nodded slowly. "Understood." The next board review was rough. Not dramatic. Worse. Clinical. Questions about margin drift, about duplicated vendor costs, about why similar projects were producing different results across teams. My manager tried to explain. She referenced frameworks, initiatives, strategic intent. Someone interrupted. "Who designed the original workflow?" She hesitated. Someone else answered. "He did." Eyes turned to me, not accusing, assessing. I spoke carefully. I explained the original structure. Then I explained which parts had been changed, and when. I didn't assign blame. I didn't editorialize. I just described reality. When I finished, the room was quiet. Afterward, she confronted me in the hallway. "You blindsided me," she said, voice low. "I answered the question I was asked," I replied. "That's not loyalty." I met her eyes. Neither is minimizing someone's role and expecting them to absorb the risk. She stared at me, stunned, not angry now, exposed. Things unraveled quickly after that. Finance froze discretionary spending. A vendor demanded a renegotiation. A senior engineer quit with 2 weeks' notice, citing directional uncertainty. My manager started copying me on emails again, asking for input. For help, I responded politely, professionally. But I didn't rebuild what I'd been deliberately removed from, because that would have been dishonest. HR finally scheduled a meeting. They framed it as a career conversation, asked how I was feeling, whether I saw a future there. I told them the truth. "I've been operating without authority, but with responsibility," I said. "That's not sustainable." They nodded, took notes, offered no solutions. 2 days later, I submitted my notice. No theatrics, no speech, just a letter, clean and factual. The reaction was immediate. Meetings canceled, then rescheduled, then escalated. My calendar filled with requests labeled urgent. My manager asked if I could stay longer, train someone. "Ensure continuity," I declined. "I'll document what I own," I said. Nothing more. The last week was chaos disguised as control. People realized how many decisions routed through me by habit, not design. Questions piled up. Dependencies surfaced. My inbox became a map of everything that had been quietly centralized without acknowledgement. On my final day, my manager avoided me. HR shook my hand, thanked me for my service. As I packed my things, the office buzzed with whispered conversations. Not about me leaving, about what would happen next. I walked out at 6 that evening, badge dropped in the tray, phone silent for the first time in years. By the time I reached the parking lot, my email was already locked. But my work, the way it had actually functioned, was just beginning to show its absence, and for once that wasn't my problem to solve. North Star didn't rush me on my first day. That alone told me everything I needed to know. No emergency handoffs. No, we'll figure it out as we go. Just a clean agenda, a quiet office, and people who had read my work before they ever met me. Daniel walked me through the plan. Clear authority, clear expectations, a role built around decisions, not cleanup. You're here to design, he said, not to disappear behind other people's confidence. I nodded. I didn't need convincing. 2 weeks in, I got my first message from my old company. It wasn't from my manager, it was from finance. Short, careful, almost polite. They were having trouble reconciling a vendor transition. Apparently, the documentation wasn't aligning with the implementation. They wanted to know if I could clarify historical context. I replied once. I provided all documentation during handover. Anything beyond that would require a consulting agreement. They didn't write back. Over the next month, stories filtered in, never directly, never officially. Former colleagues texting late, people I trusted enough to answer honestly. The delays hadn't stopped. They'd compounded. A project I'd warned about, quietly, months earlier, missed a regulatory window. Another had to be rebuilt because no one fully understood why certain constraints existed in the first place. My manager was no longer leading reviews. She still attended them, but someone else spoke more. The board had questions now, not emotional ones, structural ones. Why had so much knowledge lived in one place without acknowledgement? Why had authority been separated from accountability? Why had risk been managed informally instead of owned? Those are not questions with scapegoat answers. Those are design failures. At North Star, the contrast was almost uncomfortable. People asked before deciding. Credit was explicit. If something went wrong, it was dissected, not buried. There was no smile when things got hard, just focus. One afternoon, Daniel forwarded me a news alert, a leadership update at my former company. My manager had been reassigned, not fired, just moved sideways. A strategic realignment. I stared at the screen longer than I expected to. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled, because nothing about it felt personal anymore. 6 months after my departure, North Star closed a major deal with my former company's biggest rival. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but no one mentioned it out loud. That's how adults handle things. During the celebration dinner, someone raised a glass and joked about career timing, about knowing when to stay and when to move. I smiled, but I didn't add anything. Later that night, alone at home, I thought back to that conference room. The smile, the laughter that wasn't quite laughter, the 13%. It hadn't been about the number. It had been about what she thought it meant. She believed I'd accept the story she was telling me about myself, about age, about ambition, about limits. What she never considered was that silence isn't agreement. Sometimes it's inventory. I didn't burn bridges. I didn't expose anyone. I didn't demand an apology. I just left a system to operate without the part it had stopped respecting. And systems always reveal the truth eventually. Now, when people ask why I made the move at 46, I tell them the simple version. I realize loyalty without leverage is just habit. They usually nod. Some of them understand immediately. The rest will learn later. I turn 47 next month. No meeting scheduled. No jokes attached. Just work that reflects what I actually do, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I didn't need revenge to get there. I just needed to walk away at the right time.